Hands no longer held but a thread uncut. Written by Bria_of_the_Midwest. Watashi_wa_okame. Dubbed by Melberry Stars. Summary. Katsuki has always been aware of Deku's issues and his anxiety. It was obvious even as a kid. His depression, however, was a snake in the grass. It offered its sweet apple to anyone who tried to pry, placating curious eyes with a "I was tired, I'm so clumsy," and the ever-present, ever-infuriating "I'm fine." Katsuki's always wondered why no one said anything when it was so obviously tearing the other apart. He never considered that they just didn't care. Katsuki wonders if he has any right to, but he thinks that it's fair, that even if he doesn't have a right to Deku's happiness or his future, he has a responsibility to undo the hurt he ignored. Trigger warning. Very tired, very depressed Izuku that's on the track of healing but is in a bad slump. Also, before we start this, I just want to say this has self-deprecation, self-esteem issues, mental health issues, implied reference to suicide, neglectful parenting, and bullying. Please, if this is somehow triggering to you, please click off. Your mental health is really important. Alright, let's get started.
Why do you still call me that?
If it were a normal day, Izuku might have feigned ignorance, might have tilted his head with a "what, Kachan?" This isn't a normal day. He's tired, so instead he blinks up at Bakugo, uneven lids dragging over his eyes, too heavy to be anything more than a half-mast. It's the sort of bone-deep exhaustion, full-on heavy shoulders and a cavern beneath his eyes that makes even Deku lose his smile. He inhales, leaving him empty rather than full, hollow and numb and distant. Perhaps with an exhale, he'd be taken away from it all. He's too tired to care if he's being honest. And that's a red flag. He knows it. He knows it is. He knows that when nights go longer and his dreams go darker, he should be worried. And he will be, eventually, but not when Katsuki is standing in front of him, arms crossed and face severe. Because I was stupid, he says, eyes rolling to his hands, ugly, scarred things misshapen and testament to how far he's come, how much he's failed. He picks at a cuticle until it stings. If he weren't so numb, he might stop, might switch fingers. He doesn't stop picking until a bright red line swells along his nail.
I still am, aren't I?
He snorts, and it's so self-deprecating that Bakugo flinches, brows drawing down and his nose flaring. A familiar expression. He means to snap. He means to growl about how he already knew that, but his mouth is too dry. The words are too heavy. Dumb Deku, right? Can't let go of his dreams, let alone his first friend. The words come out thick, eyes wet as he chokes on them. He smiles with a grimace, and Bakugo just watches. The smile. Useless. The smile, it's more like a grimace really, that comes to Midoriya's face is sardonic and self-berating, self-loathing thing. It's a sort of expression that doesn't belong on that freckled face. So why, then, did it look like it fit? Like the expression had been etched onto the lines of his face until the creases had aged from use. It's the sort of thing he always hides, the fact that Katsuki always thought was there but never saw.
You want to know why?
He asked softly in the sort of way that made Bakugo almost say no. No, he doesn't.
Because I couldn't live in a world where the one person who actually saw me hated me.
His laugh came out as more of a choked sob, harsh and self-deprecating.
Because I needed at least to pretend I had a chance with you. Because if I didn't, if I didn't have a chance with one person who saw me then human, then who did I have a chance with?
His lungs rattle in the next inhale, eyes fluttering closed as he sags, a coil tightening around his chest, heart and lungs squeezing.
I tried to let you go. You hated me. You called me names and pushed me around, but
A wet choke sobbed. His palms come up, thumb wiping at his nose as he chuckles wetly. A sniff.
I just couldn't do it. I couldn't call you Bakugo because I knew that if I did, it would be it. And I couldn't live like that. I couldn't. His jaw clenches, a harsh line of tense muscle jumping beneath his skin, freckled cheeks puffy and red. A tear slips past, and he doesn't even try to wipe it, unable to muster the energy for that. A loud, heavy exhale confirms as much. Katsuki barely breathes, the world rolling around in his mind as he tries to look beneath. With Deku, you always had to read between the lines, to catch every moment, every gesture. It's easy, him being so tired, so done with it all, so done with life. He couldn't go on like that. That's what Deku didn't say, words born from that depression, but swallowed by the anxiety. Katsuki has always been aware of Deku's issues. His anxiety was obvious even as a kid. His depression, however, was like a snake in the grass. It offered its sweet apple to anyone who tried to pry, placating curious eyes with a, "I was tired, I'm so clumsy," and the ever-present, ever-irritating, "I'm fine." Katsuki's always wondered why no one said anything when it was so obviously tearing the other apart. He never considered that they just didn't care. In hindsight, it was obvious, with the teachers and the doctors. So obvious. But you still had your mom. It shouldn't be a question. He'd often thought of Inko, how she was handling the crying, the wounds, and more often than not, he waited with bated breath for his mother to come storming his way after a phone call from the nerd's mom. It never came. The way Deku freezes before visibly slumping, a puppet, worn strings finally cut, a dry, surprised laugh breaking through. It makes something uncomfortable settle in Katsuki's guts, twisting and writhing and crawling beneath the surface until nausea forces his mouth to shut. I haven't had a conversation with my mom in years. That couldn't hurt much more to hear. And now he says it, so resigned as if being forced to talk about the weather. It makes Katsuki choke, throat tightening, ears ringing, heart dropping and twisting and breaking. Perhaps it was the guilt, or maybe pity. He has to wipe his palms onto his pants, fingers curling in the fabric. Something's curling in his chest, hot and burning, crawling up his throat, with no way out. Not yet, and for once, not at Deku. Your mom was always so nice. The words register, but they're heavy, lips numb. A desperate, pitiful, selfish attempt at reassurance. His ears are ringing, but Deku breaks through that so easy. He always does. And when was the last time you talked to my mom? When we were 4, 3? He bites, and Katsuki finds his next breath a bit too shallow. She was fine at first, even after the diagnosis, but after a few months, maybe when she finished, I don't know, processing it all, she just... He bites his lip, his raw, swollen lip, and his eyes burn around the edges, nose tingling. He remembers. Of course he does. How a switch had been flipped and he didn't even get the chance to appreciate his mother before she just stopped. And if it were too difficult, even try to love him. He breathes in, his lungs rattle, shuddering, and wet, sour words come to his tongue, pushing against his teeth. He stays like that until his head pulses. Nerd. Hey, breathe, Bakugo says. If Midori was any more aware, he might have been surprised by the concern on his old friend's face. Instead, he exhales a, "oh," lungs burning, spasming into his chest. When his eyes close, tears finally fall, warm and all too familiar. They're heavy, too. The thick sort of thing that hurts more than it helps. That leave dried, crackling tracks on his cheeks for him to see in the morning. A physical reminder how broken he is sometimes to remember who he is. He's tired, and so they fall, slowly, one by one, empty from the loss he had dealt with years ago. Stop crying. Stop. He doesn't care. She doesn't care. No one cares. He knows it isn't true. He knows he has friends now, friends that care a whole lot.
But sometimes, when he's tired, it's hard to remember and even harder to believe. His teeth grind together, crackling against each other until his jaw aches.
I, I'm...
He sobs, one hand coming up, palm smearing thick tears across his moist cheeks.
I'm sorry.
Katsuki short-circuits at that, a small pop in his hand. Deku flinches and Katsuki tightens his fist until they ache, knuckles white and sharp against his palm.
The fuck are you apologizing for?
He growls, throat too tight to hide the concern, the confusion, the worry. Had he really not noticed? Had he really missed this, or had Deku successfully hit it? Neither options eased the guilt gnawing at his insides. Deku sniffs, and that pitiful smile is back. Had he always been this sad? Was this what has always been lurking underneath? What Katsuki had caught a wind but never seen?
Take a swan dive off the roof.
The ringing's back as his jaw flexes. Deku doesn't seem to notice, eyes still low.
I was annoying because I didn't let go, and I know I should have. I'm sorry for putting you through that.
Had Deku started with that, Katsuki might have scoffed and scowled and bitten back something callous. This, however, this was pitiful. This was heartbreaking. First year of middle school, he'd burned Deku. It was bad enough that Deku, even when trying to cover up, couldn't hide how red the skin was underneath. His tears were silent. The teachers didn't even ask who'd done it. Katsuki had thought it was because it was obvious, but they never approached him about it. He'd learned later that they didn't even file an incident report. They'd scolded Deku, and he just sat there, not really listening until they slapped him on the wrist, spewing venom about he needed to
pay attention, young man.
He got sent home since he couldn't take notes. Katsuki had wondered what Inko had done, wondered why she hadn't raised hell at that school, didn't call his mom, wondered why Deku was in class the next day, obviously in pain and without a lunch. Katsuki never burned him that badly again. He never asked either. Not what Inko had done, what he'd said, if it scarred. Nausea sits heavy as it all comes together, making a warped picture where he wasn't the villain, or he, all popping hands and cruel words, was the closest thing to a hero that a quirkless kid had. The one person that saw me as human. Slowly, thoughtlessly really, he reaches out a hand, palm up. Just as slowly, Deku looks up, neck creaking and craning, puffy eyes still glossy and tired. So tired. Of fighting, of remembering, of existing.
We need to see Mr. Aizawa. We need to burn Aldera to the ground. I'm sorry.
Katsuki says none of that. Not yet. Instead, he waits until Izuku accepts his hand so that they can stand together. That night, he makes Katsuran. And if when Deku tries calling him Bakugo, eyes dull and low, small smile and resigned, Katsuki corrects the nerd. That's something for them and no one else. And if Katsuki tries to call him Midoriya and even tests Izuku, the response is a small genuine laugh, and an affirmation that he'd much prefer Deku. I like the new meaning. And Katsuki decides that he could only respond with a well-meaning laugh, and that he will respect whatever Deku decides. And no one needs to know that either.